We continue now at the top of Daf Mem Dalet Amud Aleph and Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 44a. This daf is sponsored by Alexander Rosenfeld in memory of Reb Aaron ben Reb Ephraim Rosenfeld. Thank you for your sponsorship. If you'd like to sponsor an Amud or a Daf, see the description box below to see how you can support this channel. On the previous Amud, Rava made a comment that any brisa that's not explained by Zeiri is not explained properly, and the Gemara said on the previous Amud that we were referring to a brisa which discusses achilas kodshim b'tumas haguf, eating something that is holy b'tumas haguf. And without going through all of the details of the phrasing of the brisa, since the Gemara on this daf is going to explain the brisa, but the brisa essentially said that it needs to talk about both the lenient cases and the strict cases. Otherwise, there would be a misunderstanding in terms of what the halacha is by achilas kodshim b'tumas haguf. And the Gemara in the previous Amud was in the middle of suggesting that perhaps what it means is the lenient is talking about the lenient kind of tumah, tumas sheretz, and the strict is talking about the strict kind of tumah, which is tumas meis. But that wouldn't make sense either, because what would it mean when the brisa said imelo nemru chamuros, that if chamuros would not be stated, then hayisi omer, then I would have said al hachamuros b'misa, that the chamuros, again tumas meis, talking about meiser sheni. Let's say a person eats meiser sheni but tumas meis, I would have said al hachamuros b'misa had it not been stated. But the Gemara says, how could that be? Hamitumas sheretz ka'asya. What do you mean if the chamuros, if tumas meis wasn't stated in the pasuk? So I would have learned it from tumas sheretz through a kal v'chomer, and by a kal v'chomer there's a rule v'dayo lavo minadin lios kenidon, that you can only go as far as the source of the kal v'chomer. If you're learning tumas meis from tumas sheretz, we know that there's no misa. So tumas meis also, you would assume that there is no misa. So we would not have said that had it not been stated again by tumas meis. So the question again is, what is the explanation of this brisa? And so here's where Zeiri explains the brisa as follows. Amar Zeiri says, kalos, when the brisa uses the term kalos, lenient, that means tumas sheretz. That does in fact mean tumas sheretz. And chamuros, when the brisa uses the word chamuros, tumas meis, that refers to tumas meis. V'hachi kamar, and this is how we understand the brisa. Ilu nemar tumas sheretz, if the pasuk said tumas sheretz, v'nemar meiser truma, and it said by meiser and truma, v'lo nemra tumas meis, but it didn't mention anything about tumas meis. So here's what I would have thought. Hayisi omer, I would have said as follows: kalos al hakalos belav, that when it comes to the lenient with the lenient, meaning when we're talking about tumas sheretz by meiser sheni, there would be a negative commandment. V'al chamuros b'misa, and then by the chamuros, by that which is stricter, it would be b'misa, it would be a punishment of misa b'dei shamayim. Umidekalos ala chamuros b'misa, and once we know that by the lenient kind of tumah, by the chamuros, which would be talking about truma, that there is the death penalty, so then chamuros nami ala kalos b'misa, I would think the reverse is also true. That let's say you have the strict kind of tumah, tumas meis, but you have the lenient kind of kodshim or kodesh, like meiser sheni, I would think that's also b'misa, because as long as you have one chamuros, even though you have one kalos, it's going to be the death penalty. That's what I would have thought. Lakach nemru chamuros. That's why chamuros has to be stated in the Torah, so you don't make that mistake. And Rashi explains, V'iba achilas meiser, if we're talking about achilas meiser, eating meiser sheni, that's from the previous Amud. Again, the suggestion was that the brisa is talking about eating meiser sheni, and kalos means eating meiser sheni because of tumas sheretz, and the chamuros means eating meiser sheni because of tumas meis. If that's the case, V'iba achilas meiser kamar, if the context of the brisa is eating meiser, dimlo nemru chamuros, and the brisa is saying that if it wouldn't have stated in the Torah chamuros, hayisi omer al tumas sheretz belav, al tumas meis b'misa, then I would have erroneously said that by tumas sheretz it would just be a negative commandment, but by tumas meis it would be the death penalty for eating meiser. And lakach nemru tumas meis chamuros, and that's why it does say tumas meis, which is stricter. V'nemer b'hu lav, and says a lav over there. Delo tema b'hu misa, that you shouldn't say there's misa in that case b'meiser when it comes to meiser sheni. V'im lo nemru el kalos hayisi omer al chamuros b'misa. So then the brisa is saying again, if it only said the kalos, the lenient, I would have said by the chamuros, meaning by the tumas meis, I would have said the death penalty. How could that be? Tumas sheretz udasi b'kal v'chomer. It would have been learned from tumas sheretz through a kal v'chomer. V'dayo lavo minadin lios kenidon. You can't go further than the source of the kal v'chomer. V'lo amina b'misa. I wouldn't have thought of misa in a case of tumas meis by meiser sheni. Elolav, I would have known that it could only be a lav. It can't go further than what you're learning the kal v'chomer from. And Rashi continues, v'hachi kamar, and again Zeiri explains the brisa. This is what the brisa is saying. Ilu nemar tumas sheretz v'nemar meiser. If it would have said tumas sheretz in the Torah by meiser sheni, by eating meiser sheni, sheni belav kedisa, that's a negative commandment, which is the halacha. Utruma b'misa kedisa, and by truma, if a person eats truma b'tumas sheretz, so then there's the death penalty misa b'dei shamayim, which is the halacha. V'lo nemar, but it would not have said in the Torah tumas meis. It wouldn't have mentioned the halacha by tumas meis. So here's what I would have said. Hayisi omer, I would have said kalos ala kalos belav, lenient by lenient. It's a negative commandment, meaning b'tuma kala de sheretz ala chilas kalos. If you're talking about tumas sheretz, which is lenient, and eating something lenient could go in meiser like meiser, yehei belav kedisa. That's a negative commandment, as is the halacha. The kalos ala chamuras b'misa, and lenient by strict, it's the death penalty. Meaning, v'tumas sheretz ala chilos hachamuros. If a person has tumas sheretz and he's eating something strict, could go in truma like truma, b'misa, then you have misa b'dei shamayim, the death penalty. K'deisa, which is the halacha. Umino hava gamrinan, and if I would have known that, but again, the rest would not have been stated by the Torah, I would have learned as follows. Tumas sheretz kalos ala chamuros b'misa. If you have a situation of sheretz which is lenient with strict, again, tumas sheretz by truma, it's the death penalty. So af chamuros al kalos nami b'misa. Also, if you have a strict kind of tumas meis, with something lenient, meiser sheni, that also would carry the death penalty. That's what I might think. To mali tuma chamura v'achila kala. Mali achila chamura v'tuma kala. What difference does it make if it's a strict tuma and a lenient eating, or it's a strict eating and a lenient tuma? Lakach nemru chamuros, and that's the reason why the Torah has to talk about chamuros, meaning tumas hameis al achilas meiser shalo tei b'misa. It's telling us that when you have the strict tumas meis and eating meiser, that it's not the death penalty. Uperish bolav. The Torah explains that that's a lav. V'lo b'misa, not death. Lomar lach shehi b'azara. To say again that it's just a warning, it is not misa b'dei shamayim, it is not death at the hands of heaven. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, kol sheyesh lo matir, in any part of the carbon that has a permitter, bein la adam, bein la mizbeach, whether to a person or whether to the mizbeach, meaning whether it's being eaten by a person, that part of the carbon, or whether it's being consumed by the mizbeach, that particular part of the carbon. Chayav and olav mishum pigel. There's a liability due to pigel. And the Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis taught, Oeno mevi ela kayotze b'shlamim. Maybe it should only be things that are like shlamim, meaning to say, it says the concept, the liability of pigel by shlamim, and so therefore maybe only karbanos that are similar to shlamim should be included in pigel. That's what the Brisa is saying. Ma shlamim miyuchadim, and just like shlamim are unique, necholin l'shnei yamim v'laylo echad, that they are eaten for 2 days and a night, af kol nechol l'shnei yamim v'laylo echad, maybe also only karbanos that are eaten for 2 days and a night. So nechol liyom v'laylo minayin, how do we know to include karbanos that are eaten for 1 day and 1 night? Talmud lomar, the pasuk says, mi besar, and that's an extra word in the pasuk. The full pasuk again is v'im he'achol yachel mi besar zevach shalamav, and therefore from the word mi besar we learn again that it's even something that's eaten for a day and a night. Call it sheshirea necholin. Now it says we understand to include anything where the remainder is eaten. But what about ola? What about a carbon ola? She'en shirea necholin, where its remainder is not eaten. Minayin, from where do we know that's also included in the halachas of pigel? Talmud lomar zevach, the pasuk says the word zevach in that pasuk. And minayin l'rabos ha'ofos v'hamenachas, how do I know to include the bird karbanos and the carbon minchas? Ad shani marbe log shemen shal metzora, and that I'll even include the log shemen, the oil of the Metzora. And so the Brisa says, Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, Asher Heimat Makadishim Li, that's a pasuk by Tumah, and Ve'asi Nosor Chilul Chilul Mituma. We know that Tumah, that the halachas of Tumah by Karbonos apply by all Karbonos. We have Gzeir Shava Chilul Chilul, we learn Nosor from Tumah. Ve'asi Pigul Avon Avon Mi Nosor, then we have another Gzeir Shava, we learn Pigul from Nosor through the Gzeir Shava of Avon Avon. Ume'achar Shesofo L'Rabos Kol Davar, now that we're including everything, all kinds of Karbonos in the halachas of Pigul, so Lama Nemar Shlamim, why does it say Shlamim? Lama Nemar Shlamim Me'ata, why does it now say Shlamim? And the Brisa says to that, Lomar Loch, it's to say to you, Ma Shlamim Yuchadim Sheyesh Lahen Matirin, just like Shlamim are unique, that they have a permitter, Bein La'adam, Bein La'mizbeach, whether to a person or whether to the Mizbeach, Afkol Sheyesh La'matirin, so to anything that has a permitter, Bein La'adam, Bein La'mizbeach, whether to a person or whether to the Mizbeach, Chayovin Alein Misham Pigel, there's going to be a liability of Pigel. And the Gemara continues at the two dots ha'ola, so we're going to give examples now of these matirin when it comes to carbon ola. Dama matir es besar lemizbeach, the blood of the carbon ola, it's a permitter that now the meat of the carbon ola is going to be consumed by the mizbeach. V'ora lekohanim, it's also a permitter that the hide is going to go to the kohanim. And ola sa'of, when it comes to the bird ola, dama matir es besar lemizbeach, its blood is a permitter of the meat of the ola sa'of to the mizbeach. And chata sa'of, when it comes to the chata sa'of, the bird chatos, dama mater es besar lekohanim, the blood permits the meat to the kohanim. And parim hanisrafim useirim hanisrafim, when it comes to the bulls that are burned, and the seirim, the goats that are burned, again, these are the inner carbon chatoses, dama mater es emureyan likarev, so their blood is a mater, it's a permitter for the sacrificial portions to be offered. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, umotzi anias hakometz ves halavona, v'haktores, uminchas kohanim, uminchas kohen Mashiach, uminchas nesachim v'hadam. Excluded from pigul are the kometz. Again, the kometz is something which permits. It is not something which is permitted by the matir. And all of these things in the list are the same idea: the lavona, the frankincense, the ketores, the incense, the minchas kohanim, which is totally burned, the mincha of the kohen gadol, the minchas nesachim, the mincha with the libations, and the dam and the blood. All of those, there's no liability for pigul for those. Rabbi Shimon says, Ma shlamim yuchadim, just like a carbon shlam is unique, sheyesh bo al mizbeach hachitzon, because it is something where the blood is applied on the outer mizbeach, v'chayav and olav, and then there's a liability. Afkol sheyeshnan al mizbeach hachitzon, so too only karbonos, where the application of the blood is on the outer mizbeach, chayav and olav mishum pigul, is there a liability of pigul. Yotzu parim hanisrafim usirim hanisrafim. Rabbi Shimon says that excludes the parim hanisrafim, the seirim hanisrafim, the inner carbon chatases, hoel she'ein al mizbeach hachitzon kashlamim, since the blood is not applied to the outer mizbeach like a carbon shlamim, ein chayav and olav mishum pigul. There is no liability due to pigul. And Rashi explains, Ad Shani Marba, the Brisa said that we're going to include, again, all karbonos in the liability of pigul. Kolomar means to say, Acharei Shani Marba Arba Imoim Af Log Shemen Shel Metzora. Once I'm including things, I'm even going to include the log of oil of the Metzora. And pigul bedam ha'asham, meaning, if the person had a pigul intention by the blood of the asham, Nispagel halog, even the oil, the log of oil, is going to be pigul. Talmud Lomar, how do I know to include all of that? The Pasuk says, Linyan Tuma by Tuma Asher Heim Makdishim Gabe it's talking about the separation from Tumah when it comes to karbonos. And V'yosi Noser Chilol Chil Mituma, then we have a Gzer Shav to learn Noser from Tumah, meaning Ma Tumah HaKol Bechlal, just like when it comes to Tumah, all karbonos are included in those halachas. Af Noser HaKol Bechlal, so to the halachas of Noser, when it's left past the appropriate time, all the karbonos are included. Ben Noser Ksiv, and then by Noser it's written Ki Es Kodesh Hashem Chilal, it uses the word Chilal. Uvetumah Ksiv V'nozru V'lo Yechalu, it says V'lo Yechalu, also Chilal by Tumah. V'hadarasi Pigul Avon Minoser, and so then we're going to learn out Pigul. How are we going to learn that out? A Gzer Shava Avon from Noser. And the Gemara continues, Amar Mar, the master said, Kayotze b'shlamim, again, maybe we would only include in pigul things that are similar to shlamim, that are eaten for 2 days and a night. And the Gemara says, my new, what's an example of that? Bechor, for example, Bechor. Denechol l'shnei yamim v'layla echad, the Bechor is eaten for 2 days and a night. And the Gemara says, B'ma yosina, how would you learn Bechor from shlamim? Iba mem watzino, if you're going to learn it from a mam watzino, just like we find by shlamim, the same should be true by Bechor, but if there's anything unique by shlamim, you can't learn Bechor from there. And there is something unique because we can refute it as follows. Shlamim is unique because it requires smicha, that's leaning upon the animal. Nesachim, libations. Tenufas chazav eshok is the waving of the chazav eshok. So who says you can learn bechor from there? Ella, rather, the way we would have learned it is as follows. The pasuk says, Me'im he'achol ye'achel. It says, he'achol ye'achel, it's going to be eaten. And hani trei klali desmichi adadininu. Now these are two klolim, meaning two generalizations. They're right next to each other. The Gemara was thinking to learn from some kind of klal uprat uklal. If you have a generalization and then you have a specification and a generalization, we say then anything similar to what was specified is going to be included. But that won't work over here if you have the two klalim, if you have the two generalizations next to each other. And so Amar Rava says, Keda Amri b'mar Rava, it's like they say in the West, Kol mokum shata motzi shnei klalos asmuchim zelozeh. Anytime you have two generalizations near one another, hatil parat beineim, you just put the specification between them, vidonam bechlalu prat, and then you can understand it as a klalu prat, meaning you can understand it as a klal prat uklal, and you say anything similar to the prat, and that's how we would have included bechor. And the Gemara continues at the two dots we said above in the Brisa, Ad shani marbe log shemen shel mitzora. I'm even going to include the log of oil of the mitzora, that also there's a liability of pigul. And the Gemara says, Hamani, who's the author of this Brisa? Rabbi Meir, it seems to be Rabbi Meir. The Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa, log shemen shel mitzora, when it comes to the log of oil of the mitzora, chayovin olah mishum pigul, divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says there's a liability of pigul. And again, so you see Rabbi Meir holds that, and he's also going to be the author of the Brisa above. But the Gemara asks on that, Seifa, but let's look at the end of the Brisa. It says, Umotzi ani minchas nesachim v'hadam. It says that I exclude minchas nesachim and blood. They're excluded from liability by pigul. But asan l'rabbanon, but that actually doesn't follow Rabbi Meir. That follows the rabbanon. The Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa, nischei behema, when it comes to the libations of the animal, chayovin alein mishum pigul, there is a liability of pigul. Mishum shedam hazevach matiran likarev, because the blood of the carbon, that's what's the permitter for them to be offered. Divrei Rabbi Meir, these are the words of Rabbi Meir. So you see, Rabbi Meir says there is pigul by nischei behema. And amru lo, and they said to him, v'halo adam mevi asavachav hayom. What do you mean? A person can bring his animal karbonos today. Unesachin mikana asar yom. You can bring the nesachim later. You can bring it now. You can bring it 10 days from now. And so therefore they're not really connected to the carbon. And so the chachamim argue in that case it's not something that's considered to have a permitter, and therefore there is no pigul. And so the Brisa above, which said that by the nesachim there's no pigul, that would seem like the rabbanon. And the Brisa here continues, Amar lehen, Rabbi Meir said to them, Af ani lo amarti ella bevoinim azevach. Even when I said that there's pigul by the nesachim, that's only if you bring those nesachim together with the carbon. And the Gemara continues and answers, Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says, Hamoni Rebbe, who's the author of our Brisa? It actually is Rebbe. It's not Rabbi Meir, it's Rebbe. The Amar, because Rebbe says, Log shemen shel mitzora, the log of oil of the mitzora, matanosav means to say its applications, sharule, they permit it. Umida matanosav sharule, and since its applications permit it, matanosav mefaglile, it's possible for the applications to cause it to become pigul as well. And where do we see that? The Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa, where do we see Rebbe's opinion? In the following Brisa. Log shemen shel mitzora, when it comes to the log of oil of the mitzora, moal in bo, there is me'ila, if a person uses it for personal use, he has now committed me'ila with that, ad sheyizrok adam, that's until the point in time when the blood, this is talking about the blood of the carbon asham, is thrown, is applied, nizrak adam, once there's a zrikas adam, the blood is thrown, so then at that point in time, lo nenin, on a drabonon level, you can't get any hana from the log shemen shel mitzora. However, v'lo moalin, already at this point in time, there is no me'ila. Rebbe says, moalin, no, there is me'ila, ad sheyitein matanosav, until you do the applications. It's talking about the sprinklings of the oil. At that point in time, then already there's not going to be me'ila, but until then there is me'ila. V'shavin, now they both agree, she'asr ba'achila, that it's prohibited to eat it, ad sheyitein matan shevo matan bahonos, until again, you have the 7 applications, the 7 sprinklings of the oil, and then matan bahonos is when it's applied to the thumb and the big toe by the mitzora, and once you do that again, then it's going to be permitted to eat it. And so in any case, you see from Rebbe that once the applications of the oil are finished, that is like a permitter of the oil, and so therefore again there's going to be pigul on the oil according to Rebbe. And the Gemara continues, Amrua kamei de Rabbi Yirmiyah, they said this before Rabbi Yirmiyah, Amar, he said, Gavra Rabba Rav Yosef, a great person like Rav Yosef, Lema ki ha-milsa, he would say something like this. And Rashi explains, Amar Rav Yosef says, Rebbe, the Brisa is Rebbe, v'savar lo k'Rabbanan, and Rebbe holds like the Rabbanan in the Brisa above, in terms of the Machlokes, Rabbi Meir and the Rabbanan. And again, what did the Rabbanan say? Dehoel ve'efshar lahavi nesachim la'achar zman. Again, the Rabbanan said, since it's possible to bring the nesachim later on, it doesn't have to be on the same day as the carbon, so ein dam hazevach mefaglan. So again, the Rabbanan said that the blood of the carbon doesn't cause that to be pigul. Again, that's in terms of nesachim. Rebbe holds like the Rabbanan on that. V'afilu hevion imo, even if it's brought together with the carbon, still there's not going to be any pigul according to the Rabbanan, and Rebbe agrees. V'log shemen nami, and so now when it comes to the log shemen also, hadukatani nami pigul, when it says that the log shemen there's pigul, lo sheyeh dam ha'asham mefagel, it's not the blood of the carbon asham that makes it pigul. That's not what we're holding in this brayso. So that rather Rebbe holds matanos shemen atzman. There's applications of the oil itself which are the permitter. Shemazim imenu sheva hazos befnim, because inside there's going to be 7 sprinklings of the oil. Hey mefaglin, also they can cause it to become pigul. Meaning him hizal menas lechol shir of chutz lizmano. Let's say he sprinkled that oil with the understanding, with the intention to eat the remainder outside of the proper time. V'unechol liyom v'layla. laila because it's supposed to be in the day and a night. Kedemar binon leila kamon im shar kodshe kodshim, like we're going to include later on with other kodshe kodshim. And Rashi continues, from the fact that we understand, according to Rebbe, that by the log shemen of Mitzora, its applications permit it la kohanim to the kohanim. Because he says, even though the blood of the asham has been thrown, yesh me'ila b'shemen, there is still me'ila by the oil, at sheyitein sheva hazos shel tzarche gavoa, until again you have the 7 sprinklings. Hilkach matanosav mefaglan lei. Therefore, you see that it's those applications that make it pigel shehein matirin, because according to Rebbe, that's actually what is the permitter. And Rashi continues, the Tanakam and the Brisa, again, they disagree with Rebbe. They say that after the Zrikas Adam, so there's no Me'ila by the Log Shemen, but still velo nen, and you shouldn't get benefit midrabanan. That's on a drabanan level at Shita and Matanosav until the applications are done. Velo moalin, but there is no Me'ila de Kosavar, because again, they hold dam ha'asham matiro la kohanim, that it's the dam ha'asham, the blood of the asham, that is really the matir. Once it's permitted to the kohanim, ein bo me'ila. So then there is no me'ila. And Rebbe says mo'al in bo ad sheyita, and again Rebbe says there's me'ila until the applications of the oil, sheva hazos shel gavoa, those 7 sprinklings, aval matan bahonos. But when it comes to the applications to the thumb and the big toe, delav tzorach gavohu, that's not something for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, vaday lo polig Rebbe. So on that, Rebbe does not disagree. V'shavan, but they agree, shafilu nosan matanos gavoa, that even if the matanos gavoa were done, that those applications were done, asur hu midrabanan, still it's asur on the rabbanan level, at sheyit and af matan bahonos, until you have the applications by the thumb and the big toe. And the Gemara then said, Amru Rabbanan lahad Rav Yosef. The Rabbanan said this statement of Rav Yosef before Rav Yirmiyah, and Rav Yirmiyah said a great person like Rav Yosef would say this, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Mem Dalid Amid Beis.